Hello everyone, and welcome to your very first Git with Xcode tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to be demonstrating how we can create a new Xcode project, create a Git repository for that project, and then upload our project to something like Github or Bitbucket. And then from there, how we can take other people's code as well and use that on our own machine. So this is literally just a starter guide for using Git and GitHub, and sort of get you used to some of the terminology behind that. So yeah, that's sort of the general idea. With that said, let's get started. Git, as a general idea, is sort of like a mini file system. And Git essentially will manage or track specific files that you tell it to track. And so any changes that you make to your files can then be tracked by Git. So that's kind of all arbitrary, but let's take some examples of why we might want to use Git. So if we are working on an Xcode project and we, make some changes, we want to save those changes at some point, we might want to tell Git, all right, take a snapshot of the current state of our project. And so we can tell Git, take a little snapshot, and then great, it'll take essentially a giant copy of what we currently have in our project, and then it will save that, and we can essentially use that for later. Now, let's say I make a bunch more changes and I totally screw up the project somehow. I don't know how to fix it. That's fine. We can just go back in our Git repository and say, let's just pull that snapshot that I saved earlier today, and Git will then basically just replace the current project that you have with that previous snapshot that we took with Git. So that's one, huge benefit that Git gives you. But the main reason that people would use Git, I would say, is that you can work with multiple people on a single project. So what we can do is we can host our project remotely on something like GitHub, and other people can then have access to that project and make changes on their computer and then submit those changes to that repository. So sort of an example, I have some project, I want to put it on GitHub, then maybe some other people pull that project and they do some changes as well on their computer. Then they want to submit some some changes to that project, then they can push their changes into that general repository. And this is really what large teams will do if they have a lot of developers, or even if you just have 3 or 4. You can have a general repo that everyone can clone from, and then they can push all their changes into that general repo. So there's a lot of cool and other details that you can get into with that, but that's just the general reason on why you might want to use Git. So let's go ahead and get started on just how we can use it with Xcode projects. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new iOS app here. Why an iOS app and not a Mac OS app? Well, if I hear one more time about why I don't do iOS tutorials, well, I just have an excuse now. I can say that I do have iOS tutorials. So this is, why not? Let's make this an iOS project. We're not going to select the source control option at the bottom because I don't want to do it. So yeah, let's just go ahead and create a project that does not have a Git repo. But in all honesty, the real reason that we're not going to do that is because you might have an existing project that you don't want to, or that you did not create a Git repository for. And so I'm going to show you how you can add a Git repository to those existing projects. So anyway, here's our blank project. We don't have a Git repo set up. Coolio, and this is where I saved it in the Finder. Let's go to Safari now. And here in Safari, I'm going to go to github.com. That's this website here. And the one that I had mentioned earlier was Bitbucket. And Bitbucket, the general benefit that it gives you is you can have free private repositories on Bitbucket. So it allows you to privately host your code, and so a few people can see the code only, and you can make changes to that with your select group of people, which is very nice if you want to do that. Some people, though, want to put their code to be public and viewable by other people, and that's usually when you use GitHub, is you want other people to be able to see your code or even make changes to it. But on GitHub, they don't offer free private repositories, so everything has to be public if you want it to be free. And if you're, poor, then GitHub is not exactly what you want to use to pay for private repositories. So Bitbucket is a good option if you want free private repos. Anyway, with that said, go ahead and create a new GitHub account. I already have mine. I'm signed in. I want to search here for a git ignore file, and this is just git ignore. So search, and you'll see here the first option is github/gitignore. And what this is basically a listing of all the files that are for every language. So literally just about every language that I don't know. I mean, I've never heard of tons of these languages, but they exist apparently. So what these git ignore files allow you to do is ignore specific files that you don't want to add to your repository. So what Git does is essentially tracks all the files that you make changes to, and that's when you take a snapshot. You can save those for later. But sometimes you don't want to keep track of all these files. Maybe you have a file that changes all the time, or like a folder that you keep making changes to, and you don't want to actually submit that to the repository. Then you could add a git ignore file for that, and then nobody will, Git will not, it will no longer keep track of that specific file. So that's useful, especially when you're working on groups of teams, and it's really useful because Xcode creates a lot of files that are specific to the user that's currently using them. So what you want to do is download the swift.gitignore file, and you can see that it's basically just a file that lists a bunch of files that it's going to ignore. What we can do is we can option click on this raw button here, and that'll download the raw file. So if I option click on that, you can see that it downloads that to my downloads folder, and that's good. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Now what I want to do is I want to create a new repo on here. So I hit the little add button, new repository. I'm just going to call my repo whatever I want. In this case, I'm going to call it that. We can add a description if we want, but that's optional, so I'm going to leave it. We can then specify whether we want it to be public or private, and obviously private you have to pay for, so we're going to make it public. And obviously this is a public tutorial, so I want you to see this. The next thing is initializing the repository. This gives you the option to set up a few sort of nifty things. If you want to set up a README, a git ignore, and a license file ahead of time, you can do that. Just to give you an idea, READMEs are, well, actually I'll talk about READMEs a little bit later. Git ignore we just downloaded, so you could optionally search for that Swift file and add the git ignore right away. The license file is essentially saying what can you use this code for, and do you have to attribute the person who wrote it at all. A lot of people sometimes just end up using the MIT license. I mean, you can look up, there's tons of different licenses you can use, but the MIT license is pretty common. It pretty much just says you can do whatever the hell you want with my code. As long as you don't blow up the world, you're cool in my book. So that's kind of what licenses mean, just who can use it or what purposes you can use the code for. But we don't want to set up any of that stuff, so let's go ahead and just create the repository. So here, if you don't select any of those options, it'll give you some instructions on how you can set up your code to this remote repo. So that's what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and go to Finder here, and what I'm going to set up now is I'm going to launch Terminal. So let's go ahead and launch Terminal, and Terminal is basically well, you know what Terminal is. It's just a command line that you can use on Mac OS, and I'm not even going to dive into that. We're just gonna use it. So we can do a bunch of commands on the command line tool, and then we can actually set up our Git repo through Terminal. So what I want to first do is I want to change my directory, which we can use by saying cd, and I change the directory to be lesson1, and I can just drag this folder over here. And this folder is simply just the folder that contains my project that I just created, right? So this is the new project that Xcode created. And I will go ahead and cd to that. And so now you can see I'm in the lesson1 directory. Now before I do anything else on that, I'm actually going to switch over to this git ignore file. And I'm going to edit this in text edit here for a second. And I'm going to add another line to this. I'm going to add the .ds_store. And these are private files that Xcode will add if, and I'm just going to blow that up just a bit so you guys can see that. The .ds store file is simply, it's not a private, it's a I can't even think of the word that I'm thinking of right now, but it's a file that's a hidden file. That's what I'm looking for. It's a hidden file that macOS will create sometimes, and you do not want to add these to your repository, so you might want to add it to this gitignore file. Anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and quit out of this. So I'll save that and quit. And now I'm going to drag this file into my lesson 1. So I'm just going to go here and drag this into this folder over here and just drop it in like that. Now, if I want to see everything that's in this directory, so I'm in lesson 1 right now, I can just say ls, and you'll see it shows you all the different files that are in this directory. And what I want to do is I actually want to rename this swift.gitignore.txt to just be .gitignore. And I can do this by saying mv, which stands for move, but move actually can also rename files, which is pretty nifty. So I can say swift.gitignore.txt. I just hit the tab key to complete that for me. And then I can just say .gitignore. And that will now rename the file to .gitignore. You might have noticed that it actually just sort of disappeared from my Finder window here, and the reason for that is because anything that's prefixed with a dot in macOS is hidden by default, but I can't actually rename that in the Finder, so that's why I'm doing it in the terminal. And if I want to see this file though, I can just say ls-a, and that will show me all the hidden files that are in this particular folder. Alright, so there's my .gitignore file. Good. Alright, now we can just follow along with what GitHub tells us to do with this project. So I can just say touch readme.md. There we go. And you'll notice that it just added a file called readme.md. Touch simply says we'll create a blank file called readme.md. That's literally all it does, and that's what we want to do. The readme for GitHub is used to talk about your project. So if you want to explain what the point of the code is, how you can use it, maybe some people will actually put the license files in there as well. So if you want to put your license in the README as well, you can do all that. The README is just generally talking about what your project does. So as the name suggests, you might want to read it. That's it. All right, now the next step is to actually set up Git. We have not set up anything related to Git yet, and we are going to do that right now with the Git Init command. Anything that you use in Git is going to start with the Git prefix, so Git, and then you say the command that you want to run. So Git Init is going to set up a new Git repository. And you can see right here that we've initialized an empty Git repo in this directory here, and you can see it's .git. And because it's a dot, we have to use ls-a to see that it's still right there and it's just a hidden file. So that's good. Now the one thing about this is that if you have not installed the command line tools, macOS will actually ask you if you want to install the command line tools, or it will say that Git is not available or something like that. So assuming you've installed Git at this point, which just comes with the command line tools on macOS, then this will be successful. Anyway, that's a little caveat to what I just did. Now what we want to do is we want to start adding these files to the Git repository. So we created this .git file, or folder rather, and it's a folder that contains all of the contents for our repository. So this is the Git repository, and it is going to manage any saves or any snapshots that I essentially take later on. Now let's currently observe what our project looks like at this point, and it may or may not show this. Sometimes it doesn't. Let me just quit out of this, try to open it again. There we go. So now Xcode is showing that all these files have a little question mark next to them, which means they're not actually being tracked by the Git repository. So if you have a question mark next to it, it means that Git is not actually tracking this file. But I actually want Git to be paying attention to these files. Because any changes that I make to those files, I want Git to know about. And so we can do that by saying git add dot. And the add command simply says take all the files that are in whatever we're saying. So we're saying the dot. The dot means the current directory. So add everything that's in the current directory to what's known as the staging area for Git. So I'm going to say git add dot. And if I actually say git status on this, I could have done that a little bit earlier to show you what it said. It would have just showed that everything was untracked. But if I say git status right now, you'll see that it's saying all these files here are changes that I've made that are going to be committed the next time I commit something. So the git add dot is basically saying these are now going to be files that Git will track. So that's what you want to do anytime you are going to make a change. You'll usually say git add dot or git add this file, and now Git will pay attention to any of these changes of this particular file. All right, so with that said, if I actually go back into my Xcode project, you'll see that instead of the question mark, it'll actually have the A. And the question mark actually still remains on certain things just because of where they are. So the question mark usually means that it's ignoring particular files that are in that. The image assets should actually be saved, but there's certain things in the project itself that will be remaining untracked, and so for that reason, it shows the question mark next to it. The A is saying that it's added this file to the repository. So if you just make a new file in your project, it'll say the A. There's also an M saying that it's modified. So if you change a file, it'll have a little M next to it. But this is just good to know that these little icons in the left are not just crazy things that that Xcode is doing just because it feels like it. It is saying what it's doing with the Git repository with this file. All right. Anyway, I'm going to quit out of that, and I'm not going to bother going to Xcode again for now. But that's just a good thing to know about what Xcode is showing you for the Git repository. All right. So now we've staged all the changes that we want to make for this repository, which is good, and that means that anything anything that we want to save, we are saving everything that we've added previously. So now what I want to do is I want to commit all these changes. So what we've just done is basically said, all right, here in a working directory, we are going to add all these to be staged. So these are all the changes that I want to basically take a snapshot of. And the commit command is saying that we are going to commit any of these changes. So what I'm saying is git commit -m stands for message. And the message that I'm going to do is just called initial commit. And you can make it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. But you can see that they called it first commit on theirs. But it's just basically saying this is the first time we've committed files to the Git repo. All right. And if I hit Git status at this point, you'll see that it's saying that there's nothing to commit. You're working on a directory. Well, I think it's clean directory, whatever. But that's basically all that we have to do. And at this point, we have now said to Xcode, hey, here's all the files that we're tracking or that we made changes to, and now you've saved that to the Git repo. So that's that. Now if I make some more changes, so let's say I go back into this Xcode project, and you'll notice that all these things should actually presumably disappear if this is working correctly. Let's just try quitting Xcode and coming back into this, seeing what happens here. So there we go. Now Xcode isn't showing the changes, and that just means that everything that we've done has now been saved to the Git repo. Now, maybe if I make a change though to my app delegate, and this is literally any change, so if I make any change at all, it doesn't matter what I do, it's going to know that I made this change, and you'll see that the little M shows up, meaning that I have modified this particular file. Now if I quit out of Xcode, which I'm going to do here, and I hit Git status, you'll notice that the status is that I've modified this file. The red indicates that it has not been added or staged to be committed. So anything that's in red means that if I said git commit right now, none of this is going to be saved. So anything in red and you call git commit after that is not going to be saved as a snapshot. What I want to add though is I want to say, well, I want to add any of the changes that I've made. So I can just do the same thing again. I say git add dot. And if I say git status at this point, it says, well, you made a change to this file, so bravo to you. You can commit it. So I'll just say, all right, I'll git commit, and I'll just call this the second change. You should really make these actually explicit, but I just added a comment. So actually, I'll be explicit. I'll say added a comment. Right? Usually, you just say what you actually changed in the code, and there we go. I commit that. And there it tells you what I did. It says one file changed and one insertion, and that's what I did. I inserted this one line that's a comment. All right, so that's that. That's sort of working with Git, and I'm not going to show how to go back on any of these changes in this tutorial, but that's the general idea behind adding and committing. If I make some changes, I just add those, or I stage those changes using git add. Once I want to take a snapshot of those, I just say git commit, and that will commit all those changes, or take a snapshot of those changes. All right. Now, I haven't added this repository, though, anywhere online yet. It's only on my computer. I want to send this to GitHub, though, now. So let's do that. I'm just going to copy this command right here. So copy that big block, and I'm just going to paste that in. And what this command is doing is saying, well, I'll just read it, git remote add origin, and then this thing. And this thing is just a URL to this particular repository. And what this is saying is the git remote is essentially anytime you're working with a remote repository, right? So I'm saying I'm adding this thing called origin, and origin is just it's just a name, really. So I'm just saying I'm adding this thing called origin, and it's going to represent the place remotely that I'm pulling my files. And so we'll talk a little more about that later. But I'm just saying for this Git repository, I have a remote repository called origin, and it's located at this address. That's really all that means. And there we go. I've added that. The last step is to do this. So I can say git push u origin master. And what the -u origin means is that I'm actually going to set up the origin, so that the thing that I just called origin. So origin, again, is nothing special. I'm just calling this thing origin, and origin represents this URL. I'm saying any changes that I make using git push, it's actually just going to use origin, and master is the branch that I'm going to push them onto. So I've used a few terms that you might not really understand, but it's nothing really special. Origin is just saying this is the location that I'm pushing this to. Right, again, origin is just this address. I'm saying I'm going to push all the changes to origin, and I'm going to make any push changes that I make to master. And master is just some arbitrary branch that we've called. And I'm not going to talk about branches in this tutorial, but yeah, it's basically just saying that I'm going to send it to this particular branch. All right, so anyway, you can see here that says new branch created, and it's called master. So that's all that said, and now I'm done. So I have now successfully sent all the changes to GitHub, and all my code is now available for everyone to see on this this thing here. All right, and the README should have actually popped up there, but anyway, I'm sure there's a way to customize that or set that up. So yeah, that's essentially all you have to know to set up your repository on GitHub. If you make any further changes at this point to your project, so if I am in my lesson 1 and I make any changes, so I'll just say that I'm going to delete the comment now. So I'll save that. You'll notice that again we should get the modified flag on this. There we go. There's the little m. And it's just saying we modified the flag, or sorry, modified the file. I'll go back into terminal here. If I say git status, again, I'm still in the same directory. We can see that I made the change to this file. I'll add everything, and I can say git commit now. And the change that I made was that I deleted the comment. So just say deleted comment. And there we go. We can see that I changed the file to deletions, whatever. And now I can push all these changes. So once I've committed these changes, once I've made a commit, I can make a bunch of different commits if I want. But once I want to send all this information up to GitHub, then I need to do so. And you'll notice that just by committing stuff, I'm not making changes. So I only have the first 2 commits that I ever made. To actually make changes on the remote, you have to actually send them. And to do that, you say git push. And because before that we said git push -u origin master, that says, all right, anytime I just say git push from here on out, I just assume that I'm sending this to origin master. And so I'm just going to say, all right, git push. That'll upload all the change files and all that jazz, and it'll just make the changes on master. And that's actually the branch that we were on right here. You can see we're on master. All right. And so if I refresh this page now, you'll see that there's now 3 commits, and I just obviously pushed my changes, and you can see the change here. I deleted the comment. in somewhere in here. So that is how you can use Git for your project. If you what was I gonna? Oh, the last thing I was going to show you is how to download a project that's already on Git. So assume that you just came across this wonderful random tutorial here, and you want to download this code. You can just hit this copy to clipboard button if you want. That works fine. And what you want to do is you want to clone this repository to somewhere on your computer. So let's go, and I'm going to switch so that I'm actually in this repository here. So I can say, let's go back to terminal. I'm going to cd, and I'll just copy this. So I'll just drag this over here, and now I'm in this folder. So I'm in the whole AppleProgramming Git tutorials folder, and I want to pull, or I actually want to clone rather, this project onto my computer. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to git clone this repo, and so I can just say git clone. And I'm going to git clone this repository. So I'll do that. And it clones it, copies all this stuff to your Mac. And if I look back, you can see now that under this section, I just pulled this AppleProg Git tutorials with everything that I had on the site, right? So it's now identical to the lesson 1 that I was just working on. So that's what you can do. That's pretty much the general gist of how you work with Git. If you make changes, you simply add those changes or stage those changes in Git, and then once you've staged everything that you want to actually take a snapshot of, then you just commit those changes. If I want to push those or change the stuff that I have on my remote repository, the stuff that's public or on the remote repository, I have to push those changes, and that's pretty much how that works. So the last thing that I should probably tell you guys is if there's other changes that are made. So maybe you have a few people that are working on this project, and they've made changes to this project since you've last used it, but you still have the project here. What you want to do is you actually want to clone, or you want to pull these changes. You don't want to clone again. So let's just say I'm back in lesson 1 here, and I want to git pull. So git pull will just pull any of the changes from origin master. And in this case, obviously, it's already up to date because I haven't made any changes, or nobody else has made changes on me. So if I call git pull, it already tells me that you're already up to date for this this project. But that's it. So hopefully that's a good summary of all the things that you should do when you're setting up a Git or an Xcode project using Git. I would say it's important that you use the Git ignore files. They're pretty beneficial if you're working with teams, and you can add any files that you want to ignore to the Git ignore file. But yeah, that's the general workflow. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave your questions in the comments section below, and I will see you guys in some other tutorial. If you guys want more Git tutorials, let me know, but I pretty much intend on this one being one of the last. So, but if you want to see more, let me know.